Can you believe it's been nearly 25 years since Donkey Kong Country came out on the Super Nintendo? As of this Thursday, Donkey Kong Country turns the big 25, having released way back on November 21st, 1994. And we're celebrating the occasion in a way truly befitting our favorite 800-pound gorilla. It's so big, in fact, that we had to start the celebration a few days early, as we'll be having special Donkey Kong Country anniversary videos throughout the week. And we're kicking things off with John and myself sitting down with Donkey Kong Country's lead game designer, Gregg Mayles, to find out what this anniversary means to him, as well as some super interesting behind-the-scenes details involving cut content, what it was like working with Nintendo and Shigeru Miyamoto, and how the game's story used to involve Wario? What? We cover a ton of ground here, so let's stop wasting time and get right to it. So, I guess let's go and start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what exactly your role was on Donkey Kong Country. Because I've heard, according to Wikipedia, the definitive source and everything, you were a game designer, but what exactly does that mean?
Actually, Wikipedia is correct there. Yes, I was. I guess I was the lead game designer, but in many ways I was the only game designer because the teams in those days were incredibly small, and I think it was only a couple of years previously to us starting Donkey Kong that I was actually Rare's first ever dedicated designer. Up to that point, the role of designer never really existed. So I was Donkey Kong's kind of main designer, kind of responsible for pretty much everything in the game, all the moves, all the levels, writing a lot of the scripts. I guess in those days, a small number of individuals did a lot of roles.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of hats you were wearing in that case.
Yes, quite often it was quite knowing which one to wear next.
For me, I grew up in Donkey Kong Country, and so that's been most of my life. But how's it feel for you now that's been 25 years since the release of this game?
I know, it's you would remind me, wouldn't you? It makes me feel really old.
I'm sorry. My bad.
No, I guess I'm used to it because people that are joining Rare now, the company, some of them weren't even born when we made that game. So that is such an eye-opener when people come in and go, yeah, I've heard of these games, but I've never played them, or I was never even around for it. So I mean, yeah, 25 years. I mean, some of it still feels like it was only yesterday, and some of it feels like a lifetime away. But it is quite a sobering thought to think it now is 25 years ago.
To make you feel older, I was in the womb when this game was released.
not you as well. It's
like... It's okay. I was 10 when the game came out, so I'll try to offset John a little bit here.
That's a little bit better. It doesn't matter. I'm used to it, so it doesn't bother me.
I do feel like playing Donkey Kong Country should probably be a prerequisite for working at Rare. I don't know what's up with these new hires and what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me that. I actually prefer it that some of our new hires probably haven't played too many Rare games, because in that way you kind of get the fresh thinking. You want kind of people that understand the company and are willing to learn what makes a Rare game what it is. But I think if you had people that were too kind of invested in what we used to do, we'd never do anything new. So
that's a good point.
it kind of works both ways. So when people come in going like. So it's like, I heard you worked on these games I've never heard of. It's I don't take offence by any means.
But it does still have this very big legacy. And did you expect the game to have this legacy 25 years later?
No, not at all. I mean, I think if you ask anybody, unless you've got like either supremely confident or a massive ego, no one's ever going to say, oh yeah, this game's going to be like, it's going to sell so many and people are still going to be talking about it in 25 years time. I mean, the development team was pretty young throughout, so we were young. It was more like a hobby than a job. I mean, in many ways it still is, but certainly back then in my very early 20s, we just felt like we'd been given an opportunity to make something pretty cool, and that's all we were trying to do. We were just trying to make something great, and hopefully people would want to play it, and that would allow us to then go on and make something else. So, but we certainly weren't thinking even 2 years ahead or 5 years, or will people remember it in 10 years time? Certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it stuck around this long really speaks to its legacy. And you mentioned how it felt like more of a hobby. So what was it about Donkey Kong Country that felt distinct to you at the time? And like, what were you trying to do with the game originally? And why do you think it's been able to resonate all these years later?
I think a big part of it clearly was what it looked like. I mean, I'm under no pretenses. It looked like nothing else at all on the Super NES, certainly Super NES, and any competing rival platforms. Graphically, it stood apart. But I like to think the game itself has stood the test of time, in that we were trying to. Well, I personally, as a designer, wanted to create something that was it's like a fast and flowing game that's kind of easy to pick up. It's a well-worn terminology, but kind of it had a subtlety that if you kind of played it over and over again, you kind of got to learn how the level was designed, which allowed you to kind of flow through the game. And it's kind of really interesting for me that the concept of speedrunners that exist in today quite often choose Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Country 2 as a speedrunning game. And back when we designed Donkey Kong, I mean that kind of activity didn't exist, but the way the game was designed certainly supports it, that you can kind of almost go through the levels really, really quickly if you know what you're doing, because they were designed to be like that. And I think that's certainly part of why you still see people play it in that way. It's kind of, when you watch someone play it, it still kind of looks fun. If you look beyond the graphics, which are obviously outdated now, I'd like to think that the way the levels are structured and the way people play it, it's still kind of fun to watch and still fun to play.
To that point, we can see evidence of this with how Retro took that same concept and updated it for modern audiences, but it has the exact same flow you're talking about. And I think a lot of it has to do with, as you mentioned, the level design, and also just a feel of the characters. And one thing that was, to me, that stood out, that was unique to Donkey Kong Country, was how you could roll off a ledge and then jump midair and then keep on going. Do you have any more insight into like how you handle the feel of the characters and where maybe that specific idea perhaps came from? Because I don't think I'd seen anything like that in the game up to that point.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. A lot of the best things you put into the games aren't originally planned that way, and any designer that tells you otherwise is probably either far better than I am, or they're being economical with the truth. I seem to remember the original version. We always had the roll attack was something that took us quite a long time to arrive at. Mm-hmm. We were, as part of the kind of fast and fluid gameplay, I wanted an attack Donkey and Diddy could do, which kind of supported the kind of fluid gameplay. So we tried all sorts of alternatives to start with. I remember there was a sliding attack at one point where Donkey kind of did like a foot slide and slid through baddies. Oh, wow. Then we messed around with a leapfrog attack for a while, which was just an utter disaster. But eventually we ended up with the roll, because it kind of fulfilled what I wanted, which was like kind of a fast move you could kind of do as you were running along, and you're also able to kind of roll through several baddies at once, almost like a temping bowling ball knocking down skittles, because it felt really satisfying. And when you got to the edge, obviously the momentum of the roll took you off the edge. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty certain, you'd probably have to ask someone like Chris Sutherland, who programmed all the kind of moves for Donkey Kong, but I'm pretty sure the original version was you rolled off the edge and the roll just carried on going and you fell to your doom. So, but it became really, really frustrating, because it was such an easy thing to do, because once you got rolling and you hit baddies and you sped up, you could roll off edges really, really easily without knowing it. So I'm sure we decided to put the jump in once you'd rolled off an edge, to basically try and save you from certain doom. And from that, it then turned into, actually, this is this could be really good for gameplay. So I then started using it for the level design, where we were expecting players to roll and jump.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine DKC without that. If we rewind back to the original arcade Donkey Kong, how did you get from there to the premise of DKC? Because obviously that was quite a basic platformer. How did DKC take the evolution to become a side-scroller from that?
In many ways, the Donkey Kong universe at the time being incredibly limited was great for us because it basically allowed us to do whatever we wanted to, and Nintendo were fully supportive of that. They were basically part of the remit was go and reinvent Donkey Kong. So that's exactly what we did. We wanted it to be a side scroller because we'd all grown up playing Mario games and just wanted to make one of our own. So kind of putting Donkey Kong in that style of game, but then trying to bring it up to date with wanted it to be like a very modern feeling game, certainly to support the kind of graphics that we'd come up with. But then it kind of, as most things, you start off with something small and then you just expand upon it. Like we had Donkey Kong to start with, obviously the original character. Then we added Diddy Kong, who was originally, that was our proposal for like a reimagined Donkey Kong Jr. So the character you see in the arcade, the little dumpy gorilla, whatever it is, with a nappy on, we didn't feel that would fit in the kind of new modern looking game that we wanted created. So our proposal was that Donkey Kong Jr. was going to become Diddy Kong. So originally Diddy was called Donkey Kong Jr., but Nintendo felt it was too much of a departure from what the original Donkey Kong Jr. character was. But they liked the Diddy Kong character, so they said, okay, we don't want this to be Donkey Kong Jr., so why don't you just make it a new character? So that became Diddy Kong, and then we just added the Kong family on top of that as kind of supporting roles. And then when we added the animal companions that the Kongs ride, it was like kind of bit by bit we basically developed the universe as we went along.
And the animal buddies kind of almost, you mentioned you took inspiration from Mario, but uniquely in Donkey Kong Country there aren't any actual power-ups, but there are the animal buddies. So is that why the animal buddies were in there, to kind of fulfill that role of the power-ups in a unique way?
Yeah, very much so. Part of the look of the game was we felt the graphics at the time were so revolutionary and so kind of nice to look at. We made a very conscious decision to not have kind of what you consider traditional UI on screen. So although there was a banana count, that only ever appears on screen when the bananas either go up or down. And the same with the lives count. If you look at it again, when you play Donkey Kong, there's nothing really on screen. So
Right.
We didn't want to clutter the screen up with anything like a health bar or anything like that. So rather than having like health or a second hit, having a second character was our second hit. So that's why Diddy was found in a barrel that you release him and he trails along behind Donkey Kong. So in many ways he's a second hit, but he's also a companion. So it feels like you're not playing this game on your own, you've got a companion with you. And the animals were just an extension of that, really. It was like, well, if Donkey can have a companion of Diddy, why can't we add more characters that feel like companions, but in effect they're actually power-ups? So again, there's no UI on screen, there's no kind of what you consider traditional video game power-ups at the time, but you're very right, the animals were the power-ups.
And speaking about Diddy as well, was there ever a plan to have traditional co-op? Because obviously the Super Nintendo is far more limited than today's systems. But was that ever a consideration during the development of DKC?
Yes, it was, but it was one of those things that we just had to discount given the time we'd set ourselves to do the game. And as soon as you're in the realms of co-op, you've either got to split the screen, which is incredibly difficult.
Right.
You basically got to use a bunch of the performance of the machine to support split screen, and we were already pushing the hardware to its limit. So you've either got to split the screen, or you've got to come up with some way of keeping both characters on screen. And in a game like Donkey Kong, which I wanted to be a fast-paced game, I kind of realised that trying to keep both players on screen was really, really difficult. So it was an easy early decision not to go after co-op.
So you mentioned the lack of a HUD, and that's something I noticed as well. Revisiting the game recently, you guys really wanted to make us immersed in the experience through the graphics, the sound, and the lack of a HUD. So was that like an intentional thing you guys went in with, or is that just something that naturally evolved as you worked on the game, realizing, hey, we can, if we take away a HUD, for instance, it'll make everything pop a little bit more. How did that whole process work?
No, it was right from the start. It was a very conscious decision to keep the screen clear, so you could almost have milder graphics, and it's something I mean, if you've ever played the latest game I've worked on, Sea of Thieves, I've used exactly the same approach where there's very little on screen in terms of traditional UI, because again, I just wanted players to be immersed in the world, and it was the same 25 years ago. We wanted players to feel immersed in the levels and not cluttering the screen up with unwanted stuff was kind of part of the approach of trying to get that immersion.
And one of my favorite things in platformers is when they contextualize the platforms. And I feel like DKC was one of the first games that really tried to do that, where it sort of builds the platforms into the environment. Like, compare that to Mario with like floating blocks and just random platforms floating in the sky. So what sort of gave you that inspiration to try and take that approach?
I think it came from the look of the graphics, in that the graphics at the time, even though they were clearly kind of cartoony, they were far more realistic than any other game around at the time. So we felt it wouldn't be right if we had this kind of very more realistic looking style, but then we had these weird abstract platforms. So even though occasionally there will be a platform in midair, it'll have the same kind of look as the background. So if it's in the jungle, it'll look like jungle, but wherever possible, like you say, we contextualize it. So like running along the tops of trees, effectively they're platforms, or when you're in the mine, we tried to make it look like there was like steel walkways to walk on. So we wanted it to kind of feel like it had a sense of realism. And again, that's something I took over to another game I worked on, which was Banjo-Kazooie. If you look at the worlds in Banjo, even though they're very whimsical and kind of fantastical, there's a large dose of reality in terms of trying to make it feel like if this level could exist, this is what it would look like. And I think that's the same thing about Donkey Kong Country, where we tried to make it feel like it was a believable world. And anyway, Mario, we were never going to compete with Mario's abstractness. I mean, nobody does abstract stuff like Nintendo, so we just felt like we wanted to do something different.
Is that where the whole setting came from too? Because Mario is of course known for like desert worlds, snow worlds, lava worlds. Whereas in Donkey Kong, starts off on an island in a jungle, which itself I think was pretty unique at the time. But then you wind up exploring a factory later on. You go through some mines. Like, it felt very distinct to my memory compared to others.
Yeah, we wanted it to. It was part of the immersion and trying to feel like we created like a cohesive space. We kind of wanted the levels to feel like they could exist next to each other, because I mean, platform games and even some that I've worked on, they always have the most improbable levels next to each other. Like you say, you'll have the fire level, and then right next to it will be the ice level. But with Donkey Kong, we wanted more of a sense of realism. So you start off in the jungle, and you could imagine that the jungle would lead to a cave, and then you come out the cave again, and there's more jungle, and then you end up in like a big section of water. So the kind of little overview maps we drew of the world, you kind of felt like they could exist, and it felt like the Kongs were going on a journey through a believable environment.
Thinking back to how you designed Donkey Kong for Donkey Kong Country, can you remember if there's any pushback or conflict with Miyamoto compared to his original vision of Donkey Kong as a character?
Not on Donkey Kong. As I said earlier on, our vision for a reimagined Donkey Kong Jr. wasn't kind of to their liking. It's like, so they didn't dislike Diddy. They just felt it was too far. In terms of Donkey Kong, originally he didn't have a tie. And that was Miyamoto's idea, to give him a tie. I think he wanted Donkey Kong to to have something, because the original Donkey Kong is just bear. It's a bear gorilla. He's got no kind of clothes or a hat like Mario. So I think Miyamoto was trying to give him something iconic, like he'd done with his previous characters, and it was such a good idea. And as soon as he suggested a tie, it was like, yeah, that seems perfectly feasible that a gorilla would have a tie. And I think then when it came to, because we'd already designed Diddy Kong we'd given him a cap and that kind of vest thing he wore, so I think Donkey Kong having a tie fitted in perfectly with that. But apart from that, Nintendo's involvement was always very supportive, very positive. I mean, when these guys talk to you, listen, because they got such a legacy and such experience of building games. You have to remember that our team we were quite inexperienced at the time. So kind of listening to what Nintendo were telling us or suggesting, or it was really valuable for a young team of developers. So who wouldn't listen to him? Listen to kind of advice like that.
Right. Well, and kind of on that note too, though, like, how's it feel to you to realize that your guys' redesigned Donkey Kong has become the standard Donkey Kong? Like, you took what was, a well-known character, but basically reinvented him, and now in every appearance, it always goes back to that original Donkey Kong Country look, whether it's Smash Brothers or Mario Kart.
It's sometimes you just don't even think about it. I guess being as we haven't done anything with that character for so long, it almost feels like another life in many ways. That it's such a long time ago, and we don't have anything to do with it anymore. But then, like when we saw K. Rool, when K. Rool appeared in Smash again, it was like that was one of our characters. But it's great when you see it, but then bizarrely, sometimes you almost don't feel anything, because even though we reinvented it, Donkey Kong is still a Nintendo character. So
right.
So yeah, it's kind of half and half. Mm. It's still great. It's still great though. Don't get me wrong.
I suppose with K. Rool though, that's a bit more tied to your legacy, because that's a character that they haven't really touched ever since the end of Res trilogy and DK64.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a little bit of a shame, to be honest, because I thought K. Rool was quite an interesting bad guy.
Thank you. Yes.
he was that. It was the start of a long legacy of me putting slightly incompetent boss bad guys into games. So I mean, I didn't want K. Rool to be, even though he was the bad guy, I always think I grew up on watching cartoons where the bad guys you always feel slightly sorry for them because they're a bit incompetent. Certainly things like Dastardly and Muttley, where they're trying to catch that pigeon and they screw it up every single time. So you can almost like feel sorry for him in the end. And I just love that, the bad guy being a bit rubbish. So that's what K. Rool was. So and he kept reappearing in the different Donkey Kong games, almost like he'd reinvented himself. So he started off as a king, then he was a pirate captain, and he just kept changing to try and almost, in a vain attempt to prove that he was actually a bad guy and he was actually going to win by changing his tactics. But of course he never did.
Right.
And it was just right for carrying on with, like, what's he going to turn up as next? Oh, he's a robot, or he's a zombie, or he's a cowboy, or it could be absolutely anything. It was such an open remit for the guy to keep coming back as yet another effort to try and beat the Kongs. So maybe one day they'll realise what a versatile character he is.
We can only
hope so.
And I love how their rivalry started all over bananas, because K. Rool stole Donkey Kong's banana horde. So where did the concept or do you remember where the concept of the story came from, or were there any other competing ideas for a premise for the game?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit the story wasn't exactly the strong point of the game.
It was enough.
In many ways, it was basically just enough to get Donkey Kong out there. Yeah, so I think we did have a couple of prior ideas previous to settling on bringing in the Kremlings and K. Rool. So firstly, one of them was involving Wario, another Nintendo character, where he got involved, where he'd basically, I think our picture was Mario had invented a time machine. Wario came along, used it to go forward in time, and kind of stole a load of futuristic technology, and then came back to the present and shrunk Mario down really small and kidnapped him and ran off with him. And then it was Donkey Kong trying to save Mario. We just wanted to use more of the Nintendo universe, but
Right.
I think Nintendo were keen to make a break from their remit. Again, was creating new Donkey Kong universe. So we were almost trying to use some of the Nintendo universe, thinking, oh, that'll be a good thing. But quite boldly, Nintendo said, oh no, don't use the existing characters. We'd love it if you make us some new ones. So we kind of dropped the idea of Wario and Mario being the bad guys, and basically brought the Kremlins into the game. And then from there, we just needed a reason why would Donkey Kong get annoyed. So we just came up with the idea that Donkey Kong's a gorilla. He's going to have this giant stash of bananas that he's been saving up for years and years for God knows what reason, but he's got them. And then K. Rool comes along and takes them again for no idea why he wants the bananas, but it was just enough of a story to get the game going.
Yeah, do crocodiles even eat bananas? Like,
I've no idea. I don't know. I think the meat eaters, aren't they? So
It's just out of spite.
it
Just so
literally was.
Donkey can't have them.
It was such a paper thin story that I think it being that thin actually adds to the whole fun of it. That why do these crocodiles want the bananas? Why has Donkey Kong got these bananas in the first place? Why does he want them back? Because he clearly can't eat that many. And there's loads more out there in the jungle. Like, why is he going to all this effort when he can just go outside his house and collect the bananas above the trees?
that's a good point.
Right.
They're everywhere.
Yeah,
Literally everywhere.
yes. Best not to think about it too much, I think.
Well, speaking to creating a whole new universe, can you clear up the Donkey Kong family tree? Just a very brief summarization, because there are wikis dedicated to this thing.
I know this is going to be a tough one because again, we didn't think. I mean, games today, like when you create the lore of games, players expect it to be very detailed, very intricate. Like, they want to know how everything works. But 25 years ago, players mostly didn't care about that quite so much. So we didn't put too much thought around into the characters. All we wanted to do was have as diverse a set of characters as possible. So Donkey Kong being like a big, strong gorilla, and Diddy being kind of a very light, agile chimpanzee counterpart. Putting Diddy in as a kind of a chimp or a monkey or whatever he is, it didn't really occur to us till way after we'd finished it that if the two characters are supposed to be related, how come Donkey Kong's a gorilla and Diddy Kong's like a completely different species? It's like, again, best not to think how that happened. And again, with all the other characters in the game, Candy Kong is she's almost like a humanoid. She stands up on 2 feet, but we just wanted a kind of a more glamorous take on the simian family. So again, we just put her on 2 legs and made her stand up like a human. Didn't think about it. And at the same time, we added every single character. It was just we were just trying to create a diverse set of characters without thinking too much about how it all fitted together. So, but then in years afterwards, when people started asking us questions how it all worked out, it was like not quite sure, guys. How it was almost like how do you want the family to be related as much as this is how it works.
But I think in the original game, if I remember correctly, I believe the original Donkey Kong was Cranky Kong, and he was the Donkey Kong Country's Donkey Kong's grandfather, as I recall.
That's correct. That was certainly in our heads. That's how we saw it.
Right.
Again, it was the whole game had a very British sense of humour running through it. So Cranky Kong is effectively the British sense of humour in a character. He's very dry. he's quite sarcastic. So we wanted him to be this kind of, he was almost like all his text is around like in his heyday he'd have done this and all these newfangled games. So it's very much almost poking fun at ourselves, which a lot of Rare games do. So in our heads, Cranky was the original Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong, the new Donkey Kong was his, I think his nephew, I think we had it as, was it? Or his, I don't know, his son, his nephew, something like that. We didn't think about it too much, but yeah, certainly in our heads, that's what Cranky was. The game doesn't really, if you read some of the dialogue, it kind of gives clues, but we didn't really want to push it too much.
Right.
We just wanted players to try and make the connection themselves.
And did you write all the dialogue then for Cranky or and the other characters?
A lot of it. I think it was a combination of myself and Tim Stamper wrote some of it because we shared a very similar sense of humour, that kind of very kind of biting, very self-deprecating humour. So he'd just write post-it notes and leave them stuck on my screen of stupid comments that Cranky could say, and then when I was doing the dialogue, I'd just add in the ones he'd suggested and then add a bunch of my own. It almost became a contest between us to who could almost kind of make fun of our own game the most. And that was something I think audiences really liked that, because it was quite unusual.
Yeah.
To have a character making fun of the game. Certainly, I think the British audience got it because it was very typical of the humour. I think the American audience were generally okay with it, and hopefully some people found it amusing. But the Japanese really struggled with it because sarcasm is not a thing in Japan. It just does not exist. So they couldn't understand why we'd want to say almost bad things about our own game. I mean, they were quite fine with it. It was just they couldn't understand it. It was completely alien to them in their culture that you'd want to almost say something bad about yourselves. But it was all very tongue in cheek. We tried to make it funny.
Yeah, it was definitely funny. I mean, I remember as a kid, the dialogue alone kind of blowing my mind because it not only broke the fourth wall, but as you were saying, Cranky straight up makes fun of the game. He's like, this isn't anything like the game I used to be in, so.
And we even managed to get it into the instruction manual as well, which I was quite proud of.
That's right, yeah, he had the little speech bubbles, right? As I recall.
Yeah, Cranky makes fun of all the controls and everything, yeah, and claims that half the baddies aren't in the game and stuff like that, as I seem to recall.
That's great. We are reading on Wikipedia, of course, another reference to the best source on the internet. And apparently you were inspired by Super Mario Bros. 3 while making Donkey Kong Country. What exactly did you take from Mario Bros. 3 when developing this game?
If that's even accurate.
Yeah, it's moderately correct. Some of Wikipedia. I mean, I certainly wasn't born in Colville. That's just lies. That's just lies. That's like an insult to. Colville's just up the road from where I was born, but as with many places, you get that local rivalry. So, but I find it so amusing that someone's put that I've just left it for however many years. So, yeah. So Mario 3, I was a massive fan of Mario 3. When we got a copy at Rare, it was a Japanese version, playing on a Japanese Famicom that we had, and I'd literally just leave the game on all overnight, so when I came in I hadn't lost any progress. So I learnt a lot looking at how they design the levels. So I don't think we took any inspiration in terms of what the game should be or what moves Donkey Kong should have or what it should be doing, but certainly if you wanted a lesson on how to make a 2D platform game or how to structure a 2D platform level, we certainly learnt a lot from Mario 3.
Mm-hmm. And going on to that as well, Greg, when you were, of course, you're a UK studio, so did you play these games in 50 hertz, or did you have access to 60 hertz machines and play them at full speed?
I think they're at 60 hertz. I think when they got converted to PAL, they downgraded to 50 hertz, but we ran all our stuff. we were running them on American TVs with transformers, so we weren't using UK monitors. We were using American screens that were running at 60 hertz, running on either American NESs or Japanese NESs. So it all ran at 60 hertz.
Now, speaking of the Super NES hardware, like, as you've already touched on, one of the big things with Donkey Kong Country, of course, is just how it looks visually, and it looks amazing. I still think it looks pretty good to this day, especially when you account for the hardware it's running on.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. So, could you tell us a little bit more, how that worked back in the day, and did you feel any pressure to try and make the game look as good as possible? Because I think I remember hearing that upon reveal, some people thought this was like a trailer for a Nintendo 64 game, and were blown away that was running on the Super NES.
Yeah, that was right. They did think it was on the N64. I was actually at the at the press conference when they revealed DKC in the States at the Nintendo press conference, and all the people around us were talking about it when they're seeing it on screen, going, "Yeah, that's on the new hardware." So when they actually announced it was on the Super NES, it did take people by surprise. The process was difficult, as you can imagine. When we kind of rendered the screens out on the Silicon Graphics hardware, one screen's worth of kind of imagery was more than would fit on the Super NES cartridge. It took up more memory, so just one screen of when I think it was Tim originally modelled a scene of the jungle, like one screen's worth of that would not fit on the Super NES. So obviously we couldn't make a game that way. So we had to find a way of taking what the Silicon Graphics machines were rendering and basically reducing it down. So it kind of, as a comparison, if you imagine the Silicon Graphics image coming off the screen, say it was like a 1,000,000-piece jigsaw, each one different. To get it on the Super NES, we had to make it like a 100-piece jigsaw, because you just couldn't have that many pieces being different because it took up too much memory. So our trick then was to try and reduce the fidelity of the image that was coming off the Silicon Graphics machine, but done in a way so we almost formed tiles that repeated, because if you could repeat part of the background, it didn't take up any more memory. So it was basically looking to try and create tiles that we could then build levels from, and that was a very manual task where we'd be doing it by hand, trying to create these pieces, these tiles, and once we got the tiles, we could kind of fit them together to make the levels. But it was incredibly labor intensive, and I must have spent it was probably thousands of hours on this editor trying to get these images that Tim and the other background artists had created to try and make them into these tiles. But once we'd done it once for the jungle level, we knew we could do it again for all the other levels. It was just a very laborious, very time-consuming task. But at the same time, it was like a real challenge, because to try and create something that originated in such high quality, to try and retain as much of that quality and get it onto the Super NES, I just treated it as a challenge to try and make it as good as we possibly could.
Mm-hmm. I think we've spoken to just how good this game looks, but there was actually an even more ported down version 6 years later on the Game Boy Color.
Yeah,
do you remember
right.
your impressions when seeing that version running for the first time?
Again, I was really impressed. I didn't really have anything to do with the Game Boy and the handheld versions of Donkey Kong, so quite often I'd see them when they were fairly close to the end, but it just took me by surprise that you just don't expect even the original monochrome Game Boy, let alone the color Game Boy that came later on, to even get close to it. But it was just I guess it was just another evolutionary step on the ladder of we kind of taken it from the original Silicon Graphics machines, we got it onto the Super NES, then it was just another step to take it from the Super NES onto the handheld machines. Again, it was a very difficult task, but we'd already done it once, so we knew we could do it again.
Well, speaking of evolutionary steps, something else you saw on Wikipedia, so correct me if this is mistaken.
Oh God, you guys have been doing your own work, haven't you? It's not like I've written loads of stuff and put it online for you to be able to find out the truth, so you've got to look on Wikipedia.
There we go. One of the things we saw was that you preferred Donkey Kong Country 2 to the original, which I wanted to ask you more about, if that was true, for one, and what about Donkey Kong Country 2 did you prefer to the first one, or how that process even worked, making a sequel to Donkey Kong Country?
Yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, as fond as I'm of the first game because it was such a revolutionary step, I think with most things, once you've done something once, you always feel like you can do something a little bit better. All the lessons you've learned, all the tricks you've picked up, all the ideas you wanted to do on the first one but couldn't. I think the second one for me was what the first game would have been if we'd have had more time and maybe learnt a few more lessons along the way. So I tried to retain what was good about the original, but kind of add in all the feedback we'd heard about players, how they love finding the secret levels. So we just did more of that and added more secrets and kind of pushed the levels a bit more in terms of what they looked like. Like the original was jungle, it was caves, it was water, it was mines, it was forest. They were quite, I guess, what you consider traditional backgrounds. Whereas if you look at the backgrounds in Diddy Kong's world, they're a bit more out there. Like it starts from the pirate ship, but then you end up in a beehive, and then there's a castle, and then there's the bramble level, which is very unique. So it was kind of pushing it a bit more, just trying to do more in all respects. And I think that's why I certainly think the second game was a better game as a game. Maybe it didn't have certainly not going to have the impact the first one did, and the wow factor of all the new stuff. But as a if you just look at it as a game in terms of the gameplay and the tightness of it, I think I'd say the second one is better than the first one.
Right. On that note, kind of, if you had a chance to revisit the original game and give it a proper update, say along the lines of like a remake, like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, is there anything you'd want to add back in or change about the experience today?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's going to bloody start rumours of Donkey Kong designer wants to make a new Donkey Kong game, isn't it?
Oh no, we'll clear that up right now. No, that doesn't sound like that's probably not going to happen.
It's too late. They're already writing.
No, I mean, I'll never rule out doing any type of game again, and I think even though I did a lot of 2D platformers in those days and kind of got, I guess, bored with them and went on to do something else, and I don't like staying on one genre too long before I want to do something else. But I think if I was to go back and do another 2D platform, I'd like to think I could bring something new to the genre again. I mean, without thinking about it too much, I'm not sure what I'd do. What I'd do to Donkey Kong, I'd probably certainly try and go after the co-op stuff again. I think you could certainly bring that in. All the limitations we had back then, they just wouldn't exist. Whether it was split screen on one screen or online where both players have got a full screen, I certainly think we could create. I think we could do certainly what we wanted to with the co-op, but even take it further, like having both Kongs riding the animals at once or things like that. So if it was keeping the game similar to what it was, but then just updating it slightly, could do that. But then, I mean, the sky's the limit with what you could do if we had a completely open remit to developing it more. I mean, I was quite surprised in some ways that Retro haven't developed it more than they have. I mean, what they have done is great, and I've loved playing every game they've done, but it still feels like the heritage of it is still rooted in the 90s, and I think there is scope to take that kind of gameplay and almost keep what was good about what it is in the 90s, but then look for something that a modern audience might like. that maybe we couldn't have done in the 90s.
Sure, especially with Returns. I think Tropical Freeze went a bit further, but you can definitely feel that sort of safeness with the first
very much
Retro
so. Yeah,
Studios game.
I love Tropical Freeze. I thought it was really good. Obviously, K. Rool should have been in there, but I'll forgive him that one.
Well, on the topic of Retro Studios, though, what do you think sets Rare's design of DKC apart from Retro's take on the franchise?
I'm not sure, to be honest. But I mean, it's something I've not really thought about that much, so I certainly haven't got a prepared answer for you. If I kind of thought about it, I guess I'd like to think that we were a bit more. Some of the ideas that we put in there for levels were quite unique in that we'd come up with an idea for a level, and then try and almost exploit it for the level, and then you'd never see that level again. So certainly for the first one, and certainly for the second one afterwards, like when we had, like in the mine, there'd be a level where you hit the barrels that turn the lights on and off, or there was a level in the factory where the platform went along and you had to get kind of fuel for it, if I remember correctly. They were all individual ideas, some of them a bit out there that we'd use for one level and then throw away, and then when you came onto another level, we'd try and give you a new idea to play and learn and master. And I think platform games after that, they tended to mash the ideas up a little bit more, where you get like a bit of this and a bit of that on this level, but then you'd see that feature again on another level. So maybe the levels weren't quite as bespoke as what we tried to build with Donkey Kong, where we wanted each level to be memorable and have a story. And you go, for better or worse, I mean, it's fine that people might have disliked some of the levels, but I wanted people to feel something towards them, like, oh yeah, I remember that one. It's this one, I really love it. Or, oh god, it's the bloody mine one where the lights are on and off. I really hate it. I think people feeling apathy for something you do is the worst possible scenario to be in. I'd rather people dislike something than feel nothing for it, because if some people dislike it, you've probably got a bunch of people that love it. So hitting those emotions, obviously you want to create as many levels that people love, but in doing so and trying to go after like different ideas, you are occasionally going to create something that some people won't like, but that's fine.
That's a really good point. And I actually have an example of a love-hate relationship with something in the game myself. So what I love about the game is how many secrets there are. There are bonus rooms and collectibles everywhere. And I'm curious, where that idea came from, because I think Lean didn't do it even more than Mario was at the time. But also, I want to know who to blame for the 101% bonus room. The bonus room hidden within another bonus room that, as a kid, completely baffled me. I had no idea how to access it. Who do I blame for that?
I think that was me, unfortunately. It was just another one. It was one of those. Obviously, we were inspired again by Mario and its secrets, but we wanted to build our secrets into the worlds, so they almost felt like you were discovering new areas. I mean, I grew up a massive Indiana Jones fan, so I was kind of the romantic notion of Indy discovering these like kind of hidden caves that were hidden away behind these bricked up walls. That was kind of the inspiration for some of the kind of secrets. So when you find a secret in Donkey Kong, you smash open the wall with Rambi and go into this kind of hidden area as if it's always been there, but it's been sealed off. And similar to how I designed all the levels, they're all done on post-it notes. And when we came up with an idea for something, we'd draw a load of post-it notes and kind of put a variation of each idea on a post-it note and then stick it on a piece of paper. So we'd come up with all these ideas for like, on this rope level, we're going to have ropes that do this and ropes that do that. And it was no different for the bonus levels that we'd have. Here's a bunch of ideas for bonus levels. And one of them was like, I think we just got to the point where we got no more ideas left. And then we thought, well, let's have a bonus level with a bonus level. It was almost got to the point where we're just combining anything we could think of to try and create something new. And the bonus level within a bonus level was just another one of those 2 post-it notes sitting next to each other that turned into your pet hate.
Yeah, and being able to reach 101% as part of that, it was just kind of mind-blowing to me at the time. It's like, how do you go over 100%? How can you do more than what's allowed?
that was just us doing like, how can we better games where traditionally games always give you 100%. It was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but and then we just carried it on. With the second you got 102%. I think with the third one you got 103%. It became like a feature of the series.
I'm glad it didn't go to 164% for Donkey Kong 64. So that's most of our questions, but if you have time, we'd love to ask you a few more questions from our Patreon backers, just from our fans.
Yeah, absolutely, go ahead.
And it's me, Future Andre here, just to tell you guys real quick that most of the Patreon questions are actually going to end up in a separate video coming up very soon. Otherwise, this one would just ended up being way too long. However, we will end this video on one of the Patreon questions because it's a perfect way to wrap up this video. But as for the others, again, stay tuned for them. Plus, stay tuned for tons more. We have another interview coming up with a couple more staff from the Donkey Kong Country team. It should be a lot of fun. Plus, we have several other videos coming up related to the anniversary of this game. We are truly going ape over this anniversary. So yeah, make sure to stay tuned for all of that very soon. And now let's get back to that final Patreon question.
Right, well, our final question, we're almost going to let you go. Our final question is, this comes from Adrian. He says, my question is, how does it feel to have created something that's so important to so many people's lives? And do you still think about DKC's impact today?
I won't lie in that it's a great thing to be involved in, and I've got pictures of Donkey Kong hanging on the wall in my house. I mean, it'll always be part of it. It's actually one of the original renders that we did. I managed to grab hold of that. It'll always be part of certainly my legacy. It was certainly my breakthrough as a designer, and in many ways the making of Rare as a studio. So in one respect, I'll always look back on it as like a really special time. But then on the other hand, I've never been a designer that looks backwards too much. I'm always kind of looking. I always try and look forwards to like, what new experiences can I create for players? So even though Donkey Kong's like kind of part of my past, and it's great that so many people are touched by it, it's certainly not something I consciously think about on a fairly regular basis. It's my thoughts are always like, it's either the game I'm working on now or the game I'm yet to work on. But every so often it's nice to look at all the pictures on the wall and kind of look back on what we achieved at the time.
Yeah, well, I for one am super thankful that you made this game, because it's stuck with me, throughout all these years. I still go back to it every few years and play it and have a blast each time I do. So
that's great. I mean, it's great. It's great that you guys are doing this thing at the moment for like 25 years. Because although there's going to be some people that remember it and can reminisce, but there's going to be some people that probably didn't play it that much, or even some people that didn't play it at all. So I think in general the games industry does a fairly poor job of maintaining its heritage. And it's so easy that games get lost to time, or the people that made them disappear, or the materials disappear. I mean, I bet none of the hardware exists that we built Donkey Kong on, or the massive store of the 3.5-inch floppy disk that we've got with all the graphics on that. Right. They are archived at Rare, but I bet they haven't been archived in the right way, and I bet most of them don't work anymore. And it's a real shame that there's probably countless games out there that people would class as part of their childhood or part of the industry that in 10 or 20 years or 30 years or even more, looking back to try and kind of see where the games industry was that so long ago. I think it's going to be increasingly difficult if we're not careful, that games do get lost, hardware becomes obsolete, and unless people make emulators or backward compatible stuff or keep the hardware going, there's a real danger that these iconic games kind of get lost to time, which is it's a bit of a shame, really.
No,
at least we have Rare Replay for a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean that was a. I mean, that must have been an education for some people. Some of the some of the control systems on those games are fairly unforgiving in today's generation.
That is true. No, I totally agree. I wish the game industry did a better job preserving its history, especially with how secretive it can be too. It's a bad combination of bad preservation and being very secretive. So
anything that goes on, or anyone that's trying to preserve stuff or trying to do stuff like you guys are on what happened in the past, I'm all for that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, on that note, we really appreciate you coming on and enduring our questions about Donkey Kong Country.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I don't even have to lie. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And it's been a blast having you on. And on that note, Gregg, again, thank you so much. And is there anything you wanted to, any final thoughts you wanted to leave our audience with, whether it's somewhere they can follow you, such as on Twitter, or just any parting thoughts of Donkey Kong Country, or anything you'd like to promote in general?
Oh, you want me to get a shameless plug in there?
Absolutely, you've earned it.
I mean, I'm not hugely active on Twitter. I tend to go through like sporadic fads of being on there. I think my handle is @GhoulieBoy, which was, I think I made my Twitter account when I was making Grab by the Ghoulies, so that's where it came from. Nice. Yeah, if people want to follow me, occasionally I'll tweet some images of games gone by, but as I say, it's very sporadic. Yeah, so I mean, anyone who enjoys listening to this, I hope it's entertaining. I hope it was a decent balance of insight and not too much rose-tinted spectacles looking back on stuff. So yeah, I just hope people enjoy it, and anyone that plays Donkey Kong, I hope you have a good time, and it stands the test of time.
Yeah, I think you killed it. And also, real quick, you're still at Rare too, right? So people can still see your games today, even at the same company. Yeah.
Yes, I'm still there. The latest game I was kind of creative director on Sea of Thieves, so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years and a bit now. Yeah, so that's that's what I've been working on. Yes, I'm still around, still making games. People won't see me. I don't tend to go to too many shows. I don't tend to do too many interviews, apart from this one, of course, because I've always had a philosophy of I want to spend as much time as possible making games for players, and anything that takes me away from that, like going to shows and doing media work and stuff like that, it's just I prefer to spend time making the game, because that's what benefits players. I guess in many ways make the most of stuff like this, because I won't be doing it very often.
Well, on that note, we'll let you get back to your game. So again, Gregg, thank you so much for joining us, and you can find a link to his Twitter in our description below. And with that, thank you for watching, and of course, stay tuned to Game Explained for even more on the history of Donkey Kong Country and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.